It was a technical problem. You heard something on air you shouldn't have done.
Oh, yeah.
I'm John Fox, back with part 2 of my chat with Lee Thompson. Part 1, of course, available now, so it kind of makes sense to listen to that one first. But if you are fully up to date, then get ready to hear about how Lee's the man responsible for popularising some of the most annoying songs ever, how TV people are wired differently to radio people, and how he is now an integral part of the most listened to part of UK radio each day. And just to let you know, we recorded this episode before the sad death of the great Johnny Walker, who Lee worked with at Radio 2 in recent years. Let's crunch and roll.
Oh, yeah.
You joined Viking in 1996. Just going through, I didn't realise, I always remember you as the head of music, but you started on early brekkie in April 96. I didn't know that.
I did. 5 till 7 was early breakfast, I think.
Yeah.
And so I'd be in there at 4:30. And my working day would finish at 8:45 because I also did traffic and travel in breakfast.
Who was doing breakfast at the time?
Mark Dennison, I think, was doing breakfast. I'm sure it was Mark. Also around at that time, Derek Flood. It was the gang that were kind of the hangover from the old Metro group, if you like. And EMAP had just bought Viking. So my in was a guy called Phil White. And Phil knew that he was about to leave. But I managed to sneak in under the wire as Phil's boss. Simon Logan was there as well. I stayed at Simon Logan's for a couple of days on the marina just while I was there and kind of meeting everybody and stuff and deciding whether or not I wanted to take the gig, getting to know the place. So that was great. Viking, John, we could write a book, couldn't we?
Oh,
it's
Jesus.
just... So where were you in 96? Because you were a listener, I guess, to Viking in 96.
You know my... I've kept it no secret. I've talked about it several times. I was in awe of yourself, of Scott, JK, Joel, Cameron.
Yeah, we were the next set that came along when Mark and that bunch had gone, basically.
Yeah. Because I've kind of talked about this, I guess, far too many times on Crunch and Roll. But I'm not going to apologise because it's such a magical place for you and I, which of course it no longer exists. But less said of that, probably the best. But. Why was it so magical? Because I know I hold my hands up. I know it was far more magical before I was there, and I kind of got the tail end of that magic. But
yeah, you're part of that. You're part of that history, though. To be honest with you,
and
I think it's really important to acknowledge that. Yeah,
I am proud of that. I am really genuinely so proud to have been part of just Viking, but also to do breakfast was just incredible as well. But why? Why was it so magical?
Right, I'll tell you what it was. When those guys from Metro, or the old Metro group, left and EMAP took over, Mark Matthews came in as program controller. Mark, under a guy called Mel Booth as the MD, were the two guys that basically made Viking what it was in 96, 97. What happened was, I'd met Mark about a year and a half earlier. I'd gone for an interview at Rock FM in Preston, and we got like a house on fire. I think I was after a deputy program controller's job, and Mark went, "You're not right for this, but I love your enthusiasm. I love your knowledge. I love your personality. Stay in touch." Anyway, when Phil White left the Metro group, left Viking, Mark came in as the boss. Mark and Mel transformed that station in the same way that they had been able to do over at Rock in the 18 months previous, with people like Andy Roberts running the music, etc., etc. And what happened was they basically said, look, we've got a bit of a minnow here. It's a sleeping giant. Viking can be as big and as influential and as powerful in Yorkshire in quite the same way that Hallam is, in quite the same way that Metro is up in Newcastle, blah, 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 blah. Viking can own Yorkshire, East Yorkshire, that part of it. But we need to change the sound of the station. We need to make it younger. We need to make it cool. We need to make it just hip. We need to have people on the air talking about themselves that people can relate to. It was interesting because at that point in time, Mark, I was fresh in. Mark and I got on and worked together brilliantly well. And he said to me, "Do you know anybody? Do you know anybody young and He's kind of, maybe a little bit kind of rough around the edges. Do you know anybody? And I said, look, I worked with this kid at Sunshine. He's now at Galaxy. Have a chat with him. Bring him in. So, sent a demo tape. Jason came up, had a chat, got on like a house on fire. When Jason saw that I was working there and Mark saw the enthusiasm that I had for Jason, I had his back basically. Jason got the gig. So Jason came in, he was doing afternoons, I think maybe the evening show. I can't remember what he was doing at first. But he was sleeping on a Z bed in my front room. Literally a camping bed in the corner of my front room. And he was very, very quickly brilliant, Then Joel comes along, of course. Then you've got Decker, Scott Makin, who's been on here, and his Crunch and Roll was brilliant. If you haven't listened to it, folks, go back and listen to it. It's hilarious. Simon Logan was there, So a young, youthful team. Really interesting. The person who was head of music at the time, I don't think was enjoying their role. Mark saw that it was something that could grab the bull by the horns and really kind of go for it. So I'm sitting at home one afternoon. The phone rings. It's 5:25. Mark says to me, right, I'm having an all-staff meeting at 6:00 tonight. I'm going to announce that you're the new head of music. Is that okay? And I'm like, yeah, great. And of course, the geography of where I was living in the marina and the radio station and stuff. I was living literally 7 minutes walk from the radio station. So I was in that building at 10 to 6 to be anointed as new head of music. On that first morning, Mark and I sat down. We went through the selector, went through the computer, went through all the music, and we just ditched, I would say, about 80% of what was getting played. Amazing. And just went, right, let's bring this bang up to date. Nothing more than 5 years old, bar maybe one song an hour, and that shouldn't really be more than anything that's 10 to 12 years old. Let's make this so that it's very CHR, very, very, very current. Tell me what's going to be a hit in 2 weeks' time, and we'll put it on the playlist now. We'll start playing it, give it kind of the play so it's familiar to people when it charts, and then we've got another 6 or 7 weeks, hopefully, out of it when it's in the chart. Also, can you reduce the rotations on everything? So we're going to have a super A list that comes around every 2.5 hours. 5 songs, top of the hour, on the half hour, right through the day. Strip everything right back. If it's in the top 10, you've got to give me a good excuse why we shouldn't be playing it. So that was Mark's philosophy, and I thought, this is great. This is fantastic. And that's what we did. So you've got Jason, you've got Joel, you've got Decker, you've got a brilliant music plot, you've got people on air being real, talking about what's going on, people living in the area, talking about what's going on in the area. We were so plugged in and switched on to Hull, to York, to Scunthorpe, to all of those kind of towns and cities. It was just... That's why Viking was such a success. That's why Viking is still talked about in kind of reverential terms, that period in the 90s. And of course, we had brilliant music testing that was coming through from Manchester as well. And I've got to give props to the guy who was head of music over at Key at the time, who was Christian Smith, who's now at Capitol. Christian was the guy who could see that bands like the Manics and Oasis and Suede and the Verve were going to be proper mainstream crossover things. You had GCAP and GWR staying clear of that kind of stuff. They were more your Delamitris, more your Simply Red, still playing Phil Collins, all that kind of thing. Key 103 could see that stuff was actually on the way out. And you know what? Christian was absolutely bloody right. We started playing that over in Yorkshire. I mean, the rest is history. I mean, those songs that we had on that playlist, around 96, 97, 98 time, they're still people's favourite 90s songs right now, We were lucky. We had things like Torn by Natalie Imbruglia, which is the ultimate radio record of that period, and still the most... Do you know it's the most played 90s song on British radio still to this day?
Did not know that, really.
Yeah, incredible, isn't it?
Surprised me. Do you know, like you said, we could write a book about Viking, and
we should.
Yeah, we should. Yeah, but I mean, there's still more of your career to squeeze in on your episode of Crunch and Roll. But look, occasionally I like to speak to a mole who supplies some stories.
I dread to think who this might be.
I think it's blatantly obvious who this will be once I tell you some of the stories.
Go on.
I'll pick out a few because there were a lot. Do I go with a stag do in Benidorm in 1998? Or do I go with... Do you know what? Let's talk about the time that you lived with... You lived with JK in the Bronx of Hull, apparently, for the first year in 96.
Yes.
That flat was something like our price or Virgin Records, apparently. I'm just reading verbatim what's been put here. The amount of free shit that was in there, apparently, was...
It was absolutely full of shit. You know what I did? I kept a copy of everything. I got basically 2 copies of everything. At least 2 copies of everything came into the radio station. I kept a copy for myself of every single or CD single that basically came into the building. So I built up, by the time I left Hull, I had 7,000 singles.
Is it true that you locked JK in the flat once and he had to be rescued by a forklift truck?
I do. It's funny. I do remember something about this. I do remember it like a cherry picker or something coming to the window. I'm sure we get a locksmith or something. Wow. Okay. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah. They eventually moved into the flat opposite me, Jason and Joel. Imagine that, Jason and Joel together in a flat. Fucking hell, unbelievable.
Is it true that Tech Op Pete, who taught me to drive actually, but he gave you, and he didn't give me, he gave you free driving lessons for free gig tickets, T-shirts, and CDs? Is that true? Is it?
I do remember having driving lessons. I took about 10 driving lessons, but I still can't drive to this day, by the way. I've never sat my driving test. You don't need to if you live in London. But yeah, I did do 10 driving lessons in 97, I think it was. So yeah, that must have, yeah.
Well, there's nothing wrong with commission per se. The dealer does a lot of work in order to...
Well, I'm all for being open-minded, but I'm not all for discussing this live on air, thank you.
We are profoundly sorry.
Oh, yeah.
In 1999, you go to TFM as head of music. Were you sad to leave... I'm going to briefly touch on Viking once again, even though I said I wasn't, but were you sad to leave Viking to move on?
I was at God, I must have been at an industry showcase or whatever, and I bumped into Mark Franklin. Mark, who later became a Top of the Pops presenter, but he was doing stuff at TFM at that particular point in time, and TFM were worried because Galaxy was about to launch in the Northeast. They thought Metro would be sort of quite resilient, but they were worried that a big portion of TFM's listeners were going to gravitate towards Galaxy. Now, the same thing had happened in Yorkshire, and Viking had managed to stave off Galaxy's assault, if you like, by basically just kind of doubling down on what we did. And this is a very good lesson, I think, for anybody who's fearful that when a new station comes into their patch. Don't try and pander to what that station is going to do. Just double down on what you do and do what you do best. We figured out that there were a lot of songs that Galaxy simply couldn't play because they weren't in fitting with their kind of hot rhythmic kind of dance vibe. Some of the songs included Angels by Robbie Williams, which was our biggest testing song at that point in time. The Verve Bittersweet Symphony, which was huge for us. Torn by Natalie Imbruglia, which I mentioned before. All of these songs, they couldn't play because they didn't fit the format. So it's like, well, we just play them more, because if they're the listeners' favourite songs, play them more, double down on it. So that's what we did. And I took that, basically, I'd been at Viking for a couple of years and was wasn't bored, but was just kind of looking for something new to get my teeth into. So it was suggested that I could go to TFM 4 days a week, seconded, and help them out. Just kind of look at the music, focus it. This was like 1999, focus it and basically kind of go, right, just because Galaxy is going to be playing that song doesn't mean that you need to play that song. It's more of a specialist kind of US R&B kind of vibe to it. That doesn't necessarily resonate with the listeners on T-side. you're better off sticking with Torn. You're better off sticking with, the big song at that particular point in time was Mambo Number 5, for example. It's like, play that more often rather than playing something by R. Kelly, who was actually still acceptable at that point. So that's what we did, and that worked out quite well. And I did that for kind of 4 days a week. But I was living in Hull. I was literally getting the train to Thornaby every single day. Wow. So again, getting up at 5:30 in the morning, getting the train, getting there, staying there till sort of 4:30 in the afternoon, getting back into Hull 7:30, knackered, and just doing it all again. But interesting. Interesting times, and I think a good lesson for people. If you do work on the music side of radio stations, just think about what you do and what you do best. Don't try and pander to the competition when they come along, because invariably the reason why people are listening to your radio station is because they like what you do. So just keep giving them what they like and keep doing what you do best, and it'll stand you in good stead, actually.
Do you think that you need to be a certain type of character to be ahead of music? Because you're getting attacked by all angles, aren't you? From the listeners, you're getting attacked from presenters. I mean, notoriously, we all just go, the music shit. Like, this is the reason why Rajar's going down. It's the music.
Completely.
It's that or the ads, you know. So, I mean, to be head of music, do you have to be a certain type of character?
I think you do. You've got to be kind of sort of thick-skinned to an extent, but you've also got to be quite bullshit. You've got to be quite kind of like, fuck you about it, You've got to stick to your guns, but you've also got to kind of listen to what everyone's saying and take it on board, because sometimes there will be kind of valid things that they'll say. I mean, I used to get Jason and Joel all the time in my ear going, Galaxy playing that big song by Joe, it's number 7 on the chart. And I'm like, so? What the fuck, It's like, I don't care. It's too niche, it's too specialist. It'll be out the top 10 next week. It's kind of, it's there on a fan base thing, probably driven by sales, predominantly in the South. It's not for us. So yeah, you've got to kind of you've got to be very kind of opinionated. It's tough as well. You've got to tell people at record companies and PRs, that you're not playing their song, why you're not playing the song, why it's right, why it is right, why it's not right, all that kind of thing. So yeah, it's not easy. And then of course you're on top of all that, you're booking acts for road shows, you're booking acts for events, you're booking interviews for other presenters, all of that kind of stuff too. So it's a tough job. There aren't many heads of music left actually in the UK industry now these days. Jeff Smith obviously is the guy at Radio 2 who's been there, seen it all, bought the t-shirt. You know what I mean? It's like and Jeff's brilliant. But yeah, there aren't many heads of music left. Christian, like I say, over at Capital is still one of the survivors. But yeah, not many still around.
So in 2000, you go to Metro as, of course, head of music, but as presenter as well. And it's quite a sad moment in your CV, because this was the last time you ever presented a radio show. And I read this and I was like,
so weird.
It was a long time ago, Lee, but I mean,
it's 23 years since I presented the radio show.
That's crazy.
I think that's why I was quite nervous about coming on Crunch and Roll. I think because you've got all these great presenters that still working now, some of whom I've worked with over at Viking, and guys who've got like proper great kind of like radio backgrounds of working on shows for 10, 15, 20 years. Here's me just flitting from place to place, doing this, that and the other, and not having done a radio show for 23 years in person. But the show that I did at Metro was interesting. I went in as amazingly, when I went to work at Metro, that's the first time I'd stepped foot in there since my work experience in 1983. Incredible. So we're talking about 17 years. And it's my hometown radio station. It's the station that's literally down the bank from where I used to live in Wickham. So to work at Metro was amazing. Tony McKenzie was the program controller at the time. They were going through a whole kind of transition thing, to the point where they actually had me doing shows at Viking in Hull down the line to Newcastle live. That's how messed up things were. But yeah, so eventually I went up there, went back home, They had me as head of music. I was doing a show that I absolutely loved doing called Hall of Fame. It was a format that somebody prior to me, I can't remember who, had kind of set up, and I sort of took it with both hands and went, well, I can make this a really great show. But what happened was I had been speaking to some people down in London, and Shirley Rennick, who had been head of news at Viking, had just got a job looking after the TV music channels for EMAP. So they had the box at the time, and they had a guy who was the big boss there called Tim Schoonmaker. And Tim basically had this idea, well, we've got the box. Why don't we take all of the other big EMAP brands that people know and do spin-off channels from the box using exactly the same format? So you ring in, you've got a 3-digit code on screen, you pay £1, you watch your music video, blah, 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 blah. We can use that as a kind of barometer for our radio stations. We can use that as a thing that helps sell magazines, etc., etc. Brilliant, inspired idea from Tim. Anyway, Shirley and I had started on exactly the same day at Viking under Phil White, and we were thick as thieves because it was kind of like last one's in, first one's out. But we managed to survive it. And when Shirley got the gig, running these channels in London, it was a case of, well, who on earth am I going to get as head of music? Well, there's only one person, really. So I was lucky enough, and I came in initially on a 6-month maternity leave, and I had no expectations that it would be anything beyond that 6 months maternity leave. But that's what I did. So I started doing that just at the same time that I was still doing the Sunday morning show at Metro, believe it or not. So I was living down in London, Monday to Friday, getting the train on a Friday night, going back up to Newcastle, staying over, doing the show on the Sunday, and then getting the train on Monday morning back down to London and working at the box. And I did that for the first part of 2001. And then I get a phone call from somebody at Metro one Friday night who said, oh, sorry to hear you're not on the show anymore. And I'm like, what? I'm doing the show this Sunday morning. They went, no, so-and-so's doing it. And I'm like, really? Okay, what's happened there? Anyway, it turns out that the guy who had taken over at Metro didn't know me from Adam. Why would he? I mean, on the Sunday morning between 9 and 12, he doesn't know me. I'm down in London the rest of the week. I'm not around. He hasn't got my phone number, blah, 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 blah. So that was it. That was my final show on Metro, was the week before. And I had no inkling that I was going to be taken off. I wasn't best pleased, as you can imagine. I was obviously, being at EMAP HQ in London, I was able to speak to the big bosses, and I said to I have no problem with them taking me off air, because you can take any presenter off air whenever you want to as the program controller. I just think the way it was done was really fucking shitty. And yeah, they agreed with me, and I got a letter of apology. But that was it. That was the last time I ever did a radio show. What a way to finish, eh?
I know, yeah. There's so much more of your career, Lee. But
we did the director's cut.
No, not at all. But what I'm going to do is, I think we just pinpoint some of the bits. We'll still go through it, but there's so much. I mean, you talk about the box, and then in 2004, assistant producer at Initial TV on Channel 4.
Yeah, I started doing. I mean, yeah, just briefly, I started doing sort of TV bits and pieces again because of all my background and experience that I'd done at the box, and working across all of the different brands. So Kerrang, Q, Smash Hits, Magic, Kiss. I knew them all, So I was able to kind of just turn my hand to any kind of sort of TV music projects that came along. Channel 4 had a big project called the UK Music Hall of Fame that was massive budget. That ran worked on that for about 8 months as an assistant producer and researcher. Worked on a thing called Orange Playlist for ITV as well. That again, with some of the same team that had worked on UK Music Hall of Fame. Didn't really like telly. Didn't really like that whole kind of world. No, I tell you what's interesting, and you'll know this from doing Crunch and Roll. People that work in radio love radio. People that work in telly, you know what? They don't really watch TV. They're just there because they want to be able to say, oh, I work in telly. And you get that so much in London. And it was a real eye-opener for me. And I was deeply passionate about the projects that I worked on, as were a lot of the people that kind of worked with me on the music side of things. But there were a lot of other people that in the industry at that time that just kind of like, it wasn't for me. I just thought, I'm a fish out of water here. It doesn't quite fit. So yeah, I did a few of those things. Then moved into music on demand projects as they started coming up for Virgin initially, set that up. BT had a thing called BT Vision, which was incredible. I worked there for 7 years. Wow. On their music on demand service. God knows how. Paid for the house though, which is nice. So that was really, really interesting times. But yeah, I started to become sort of spreading myself thinly across so many different projects. But radio was still kind of niggling me in the background. It's like, how do I get back to radio? How do I get back to doing something to do with radio? Because it's still there. Am I too old? Does anybody care about me anymore? I haven't done a radio show in over a decade and a half at this point. It's like, what am I going to, what's going to happen?
Can we go on to Radio 2 now then?
Yeah, absolutely.
You did your last show on Metro, and then you go into telly and you do, I think you've played it down slightly. You did some huge projects, mammoth projects, and then...
Can I just say, by the way, I'm entirely responsible for Last Ketchup, for DJ Otzi, for Scooter, all of those big hits of the early noughties. Myself and Simon Sadler, who was my boss, and Mark Adams, who was brilliant, who I worked with at the time. We were looking for the songs that Radio 1 wouldn't play, that commercial radio wouldn't play, that when the box broke them, they'd have to play them. We were looking for the big cheesy punter hits, and fucking hell, we got a shitload of them. I mean, we really did. We were brilliant at finding them. The great story as well, actually, just touching on this. Mark Frith, who was the editor of Heat at the time, worked on one of the offices upstairs, and he came to me and he said, so I've just been on holiday in Italy with my girlfriend, and we were sat in a hotel room for a week because it was pissing down for most of it. So I had Italian MTV on. Are you aware of a song called All the Things She Said? I went, no. He said, it's brilliant. Wait till you see the video. 2 Russian lesbians kissing in the rain. I went, this sounds like a box catnip. This is fantastic. What is this? Anyway, this is the days before, this is pre-Google. This is pre-YouTube. So you had to do your research to find out who owned this. Found out it was Polydor, got onto the Polydor rep, Kelly, and said, Kelly, tell me about All the Things She Said by Tattoo. And she went, I've got absolutely no fucking clue what you're talking about. I went, well, it's a video that apparently is breaking in Europe, and I'd love to get my hands on it. Okay, leave it with me. She does a bit of research, finds it, sends a VHS over. We see it, we look at it, we go, great. Can we get a beta tape of this, which is what we use for Playout? Can we get a beta tape of this for Friday? We want to put it on the channel. We went, but we haven't even got a release date for this yet. There's no plan to release this in the UK. I went, well, look, just put it on the channel, see how it does, blah, blah, blah. Of course, we put it on the channel Friday. Monday, when you get the figures through from what people have been asking over the weekend, it's the #1 video, right? So I go back to Kelly and say, that tattoo thing you gave us on Friday, it's the #1 most requested video already. She went, fuck. Went into a meeting. They then decided there and then in the meeting that they would release it in the UK in 10 weeks' time. So we played it on the box for 10 weeks before release. Of course, it went straight in at #1. Everyone knows Tattoo, 2 Russian lesbians. And that was all us. But actually, Mark Frith. So Mark Frith at Heat Magazine, he was the guy who gave it to us to break Tattoo. All the Things She Said in the UK. I
love stories like that. I love
it. I've got loads of them. I won't bore you with any more.
So, I mean, you get back into radio. You do some music programming work at Radio 2. How did you get into Radio 2?
This is really fortunate. While I was at the box, I got to know Mark Goodyear, who is still a trusted friend to this day. I love Mark dearly. He's the best. I think he's one of the best people managers and mentors in British radio, quite honestly. His production company, Wise Buddha, which is now called Listen, but Wise Buddha at the time. Oh, do you know how Wise Buddha got the name, by the way? Do you know the story?
No, I don't know.
Mark needed a name for his company in the 90s, and so the story goes, he was sat in a bar just thinking, name, what am I going to... and he looked down at his bottle of beer that he had in front of him. It's Budweiser. Wise Butter. Wise Butter. Brilliant. That's how he got it. Yeah. That's the story. Anyway, so I got to know Mark through a charity, really, called Nordoff Robbins, a music therapy charity. Anyway, when everything at when everything at BT Vision kind of came to an end, I just got in touch with Mark and said, look, if there's any work, let me know. Just keep me posted. Anyway, at that point in time, Michael Ball was doing Sunday evenings, and the guy who had been producing Michael at that time, Steve Softly, was about to go off to do some stuff for Simon Cowell, Psycho. So Mark said, I need somebody to kind of like fill that void and, be Michael's sort of trusted music advisor as to what to play in that show on the Sunday programme. And that's how I got in. Steve eventually came back to listen and to Wise Butter and has been producing Michael and does Sunday Love Songs now, and he's been working on Michael's show for years and years and years. And does Michelle Visage and does all kinds of other things on Radio 2 as well. He's brilliant. But that was my in. My in was kind of Steve moving aside to Psycho for a short while, and Mark saying, well, why don't you come in and do some bits and get to know Michael and all that kind of thing. So I was working with David Monero, who was one of my best friends, a great guy called Bradley Duggan, who was a young AP at the time, and now was producing Jack Saunders at Radio 1, now produces the Radio 1 evening show. So brilliant young guys. Me, 20 years there senior, but getting to kind of know the kind of inner workings of Radio 2 and who to speak to and how it all works and compliance and all that kind of thing as well. Fascinating. So that was my in, Mark, and I'm eternally grateful for that.
See, I mean, you took a year out to go travelling the world with your amazing wife. 25
I did. You know
countries.
Emma, don't you? Yeah.
Yeah, she's brilliant. And then you go back to Radio 2. You did so much. 2019, devised, produced, compiled. Now that's what I call chart show for Mark Goodyear, a greatest hits.
That was a greatest hits. Yeah. So basically, while I was doing stuff for Radio 2, Mark had just started working at Greatest Hits Radio, and back when it was literally starting, and he was kind of offered the chance to do something on a 2-hour sort of chart show slot on a Sunday afternoon. What we're going to come up with. So he and I sort of sat and put together this sort of format. And it was quite an interesting one. He said, how can we fill this 2 hours? Bearing in mind, we're probably going to play 12 songs an hour. And I went, 12 songs an hour, that's good. That kind of works towards a song every month. So if you play a featured year, you can do a song from January, a song from February, a song from March, blah, blah, blah. But it has to kind of, you say simple ideas are always the best, but it has to kind of work on a particular level, in that you're playing songs that you might not necessarily always hear on the radio, mixed in with lots of familiar stuff, but also you have it so it's the song that achieved its chart peak in that particular week or month. So if you're doing January 1975, okay, what songs have you got from January 1975 that reached their chart peak? And there's probably only about 8 or 10 of them when you go through the book. But that's what we did. So it was a very kind of strict format to it. I would send Mark a list sort of 3-4 weeks in advance and say, here are the songs that I'm thinking about for 1975 and 1983. What do you think? And he'd go, brilliant. I'd then go away and put the script together. That would be kind of like a couple of days of research, because we put archive clips in there and all that kind of stuff as well. Did that for 5 years. Did that for 5 years while I was still doing stuff at Radio 2. And brilliant. I love working with Mark. He's just, like I say, he's just the best, and such a generous guy when it comes to appreciation for the work that you do.
You then produced Johnny Walker's Sound of the 70s.
Incredible. I mean, this is. So bear in mind, I'm doing Greatest Hits Radio 5 till 7 on a Sunday afternoon, which is a prereq. Mark, actually, you wouldn't know it, but Mark voice tracked that show, and it was put together by a brilliant guy over at Listen called Aidan Judd. So it was Mark, Aidan, and me that would put that show together. Fantastic, brilliant editing, and but it was so meticulously planned and timed. We knew where the fade out should be, where Mark's vocals should come in, all that kind of stuff. Fantastic. But anyway, Mark said to me, he said, producer Sarah was working on Johnny Walker, and there was another producer, Heather, who was going off on maternity leave. How would you fancy producing Sounds of the 70s for Johnny Walker? And I'm like, this can't be happening. This cannot be happening. It did. I started in January 2020. The first guest we had in the studio was David Essex, who did the best interview. It was just brilliant. We had people emailing in and asking him questions on air. It was great. And I got on very, very well with Johnny. And I was 6 weeks in and lockdown happened. And that changed everything, because we've got a situation now where I'm having to produce a radio show from Dorset via Zoom every Wednesday afternoon to deliver on a Thursday afternoon for compliance to then TX on Sunday. And did that right through lockdown. A few weeks into the live shows, Johnny wasn't very well one particular Sunday, and he said to me with about 10 minutes notice, his wife Tiggy was in the control room with me, and he said to me about 10 minutes notice, can I have Tiggy to sit in the studio with me just as a bit of kind of moral support in case I'm flagging a bit, and maybe she can read a few emails and things. And I thought, well, it'll be churlish to say no, I can't say no. Anyway, that then, if you ever listen to Sounds of the 70s right through lockdown, for that period from March until September, October 2020, was Johnny and Tiggy co-hosting. And I know people look back on that very, very fondly, because if you think about what was happening at that point in time, everybody was stuck at home. Yeah. We're all watching telly. We're all listening to music. They were talking about their lives, what they were baking, the 70s songs they were listening to. I mean, it was kind of a little bit not really necessarily what Radio 2 were wanting Sounds of the 70s format to be. But I think at that point in time, we hit exactly the right tone of what people were wanting and experiencing through lockdown. And I know from the correspondence that I got after that, people were still looking back on that period very, very fondly, and how it got them through it. And another lesson here, I think, is, people like familiarity. People like those trusted voices who've been with them all of their lives presenting a radio show. Johnny, it's not... Somebody said to me once, it was really quite interesting, it's not about the songs that Johnny plays, it's how he plays them, which is really, really interesting. You've heard Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen on a million different radio stations, but when Johnny plays it, it just sounds different, because he's been there. He's been there with Bruce since day one. He was one of the guys who kind of brought Bruce to the UK, along with kind of like the Eagles and, all of these acts that people associate with Johnny. So he's got that history.
Oh, yeah. Now, you've also been working for the last 10 years with your old boss, Simon Sadler, on Now 80s, 90s. And then you wrote a book in 2022, which I encourage everybody to go out and buy.
Bless you.
The official Charts Music Quiz book.
It's £7 on Amazon, folks.
There we go. You got the plug in. And I just want to finish on this, because this is, for me, I've told all my mates who don't work in radio that my mate did this, because you've been writing and compiling the 10 to the top for Radio 2 since its launch in March 2023. Yeah. I think we briefly spoke about this last time we physically saw each other, but was there huge amounts of pressure to try and replace Popmaster?
Well, of course there was. It's interesting. I wrote the book 2022. That was a lovely little thing. 70th anniversary of the official charts. Martin Talbot, who's the big boss I've known for quite some time, and he said to me, how would you feel about maybe writing some questions for a quiz book we're thinking about putting together for the 70th anniversary? Little did I know he'd actually have me writing the whole fucking thing, but in 10 weeks, by the way, I must add. But yeah, so that was good. Again, a learning curve. I'd never written a book before, but that was fascinating. So on the day that Ken announced that he was leaving Radio 2, and everybody went, fucking hell, this is like the Ravens leaving the Tower of London, you know what I mean? I tweeted a picture of the book, and I just thought, why not? Just for a laugh, be a bit ballsy. I just put, well, if anybody's looking for a new quiz format for the radio, ... and a picture of my book. Little did I know that put the wheels in motion. So all came about that Helen Thomas, big boss at Radio 2, Robert Gallagher, who's the commissioning exec, they kind of, behind the scenes, I didn't know this at the time, but behind the scenes, when Ken announced he was leaving, they thought, right, we need something for that 10:30 slot, because I don't know if you know, but it's the most listened to 15-20 minutes of British radio every weekday. It's number one on the radios, has been for many, many years. It outdoes breakfast, it outdoes every other radio station in the country. So you're going to need to fill that void, because Ken's taken Popmaster with him because he's bought the rights to it. So what are you going to do? I can't really go into the whys and the wherefores as to how that meeting all went, and when it all happened and all that kind of thing. So I went into this meeting on a Tuesday, and they said, "Can you write 300 questions by the end of this week?" And I'm like, "Oh, well, I'm not going to turn this gig down. Of course I can. Yes, I can write 300 questions by the end of this week." Great, okay, and let's take it from there. So I wrote the 300 questions, and they looked at them and they went, "Fantastic, okay, we'll fit the format. We'll get Scott Mills to voice a version of this using some people around the office kind of as guinea pigs, blah, 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 see if it works." So we tailored it a little bit, played around with it. And then basically they said to me, "Okay, can you write the next 5 or 6 weeks worth of questions? So we've always got plenty in advance." Like, "Yep, okay, I can do that." So I just thought, okay, it needs to be, it doesn't need to dumb down, because, Popmaster obviously had an audience, and if we started dumbing down the questions, then, it's kind of, that's going to be a bit weird. But also it needs to be different to Popmaster. And of course we were aware of the fact that Greatest Hits were playing 70s, 80s, 90s. So most of the questions on Popmaster were going to be focused around 70s, 80s, 90s. Let's widen that out a bit. Let's make sure we got stuff in there from the 2000s and even from, kind of contemporary stuff too. Let's structure it in a kind of more of a game show format, because ultimately the person who starts this format, which was Gary Davis, is just temporary. We're going to have somebody else. And they didn't tell me, and I don't even know if they knew themselves, but they didn't tell me at that time it was going to be Vernon who was taking over that show. I had no clue, absolutely no clue. I was just writing questions for a quiz format. Anyway, Gary launched it very, very successfully. Vernon then sort of took it over. When the first radios came through, it absolutely demolished Popmaster. And I think is still to this day, don't quote me on this, but I know that Popmaster is still Greatest Hits Radio's peak of the day, but 10 to the Top is way ahead of Greatest Hits in that time slot. But what's interesting is that if you take the combined audience of both stations, it's way above what it was in that slot. When Ken was just doing Popmaster. So it's really, really interesting. I mean, it's a brilliant thing to do. I love doing it. I write 100 questions a week for that, do the music clips for it, send them off to Phil and Janine at Vernon's production team. And it's brilliant hearing it on the radio, because you never know what the contestants are going to be like. You don't know if they're going to be absolutely terrible or if they're going to be pop experts. So you have to kind of make the questions flow in such a way. You start off with an easy one-pointer, so people get at least a point, you'd hope. Although sometimes people come on and they've got absolutely no clue about the first question. But what's really interesting is Laura Busson, who's one of the big bosses at Radio 2, there was kind of pressure a little bit when we first started it to maybe kind of tweak the format. And she brought in two guys who were kind of quiz TV experts. One of the guys who'd set up Pointless back in the day, and one of the guys who'd set up The Chase back in the day, or advisors on it anyway. And basically said to them, "What do you think of this 10 to the Top format?" They played them the pilots that had been done. And they went, "Great, don't change a thing." And she was like, "Really?" It's like, "Yeah, because when we first did The Chase on TV, and the first week that it launched, we were getting letters and emails from people saying, 'We don't understand the format, we don't understand the scoring, we've got no idea how this works, blah, 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 blah.'" Within a week, people were like, "This is my new favourite show." And the same with Pointless. So sometimes you've just got to stick to your guns. We haven't changed a thing on 10 to the Top, apart from the fact that when we first started it, I didn't put any year questions in there. And Rob Gallagher said to me, he said, put a year question in every round. People like a year question. That's actually going to send things spin it on its head. Because actually, if people have got a good run together and then they get that year question, that's the thing where they're going to fall down. And he was absolutely right. So that's all we've done. That's all we've changed in the 18 months that I've been writing 10 to the top. And do you realise that this is the first time I've actually talked publicly about it?
That's great, and we're honoured. I mean, I'm proud of you. I'm proud to have a friend that's done that. It's incredible. I'll tell you what. Let's just test you one more time. I'm
going to get this one wrong, aren't I?
Yeah, well, after all that build up.
Yeah.
Made in London, Dirty Water, got to number 15 in what year?
Well, that sounds like it's 2000. That's sort of my back end of Viking time.
God,
I think. Is it?
Bang on, 2000.
Yeah.
Do you know what, Lee? It's been brilliant. Thank you so much for being...
Is that all right? Have you got enough material there, do you think?
Oh, look, every guest that we've had on, we could talk for far longer. We know that. But of course, time is upon us. But Lee, do you know what? I just want to finish on this. I thought you were a great jock. And for people who are listening to this, perhaps who haven't been presenters, and I'm sure people who have been presenters will have had this drilled into them at some point, a lot of bosses always said, make sure when you do a link, it sounds like you've got a smile on your face. And what you had as a presenter is you had that naturally. You didn't have to, you always sounded happy when you're on air, this is why I enjoy listening to you as a jock.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's the natural enthusiasm. I tell you who's brilliant on radio right now, Scott Mills. Scott Mills is a salesman. Scott Mills can sell the music. He can sell the promos. He can sell everything on that show. He's a brilliant, brilliant salesman. I think Scott is one of the best in the business right now. But he came up through local radio. He came up through that whole, the liner cards, etc., etc. But his love of music is there. His knowledge of music is huge as well, too, Moyles is another one, of course. You must get Moyles on here. Please get Moyles on Crunch.
We'd love to, yeah.
He would be so good. I'd love to hear his stories and tales. I'd love to hear Goodyear on here. I know you always ask people, who do you want to hear on Crunch and Roll? I'd love to get Mark Goodyear on here. I'd love to get Helen Thomas on here. Helen, if you're listening.
Love to.
Oh, man, that would be brilliant. And Giles, obviously. Giles Squire is the guy who, was there when I was a teenager at school, looking wide-eyed around Metro and going, oh, could I do this one day? Could I actually be part of this one day? But yeah, I mean, love the music. That's the key to it all. And I think a lot of people, it's been interesting listening to previous Crunch and Rolls. People have talked a lot about, the stunts, the things that they've done on air, blah, 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 blah. I think, more than 50% of what makes a radio station work is the music.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think if you get the music right, and you get the people selling the music right, it's a license to print money, really, quite honestly.
Lee, you're a top mate. You're a top man. Thank you very much for being on Crunch and Roll.
It's been amazing. Thank you so much.
Lee, would you do us the honours, please, of taking us away with the end credits?
I absolutely would love to. You've been listening to Crunch and Roll with me, Lee Thompson. Subscribe on your favourite podcast app to get every new episode as soon as they drop. Crunch and Roll is a 969 media production presented by John Fox and produced by Simon Buchowski.